But when I saw him in the first 20 minutes of The Last Dance, I was like, oh my God, are you serious? He's there? Like he made the footage, he made the cut. So it was really impressive to see that. That was
Yeah,
probably one of my favorite moments.
probably his as well. He would have been psyched. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Game Day Glare podcast. My name is Ish. I'm here with Lance. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You?
Very good. Today we're talking about documentaries. So how to make them, the equipment, the style, what makes a good documentary, long form, short form, the whole nine yards. So where should we start? What makes a good documentary for you? Let's start there.
So obviously, I think that the biggest thing in documentaries is storytelling. It's all about your story. If you're going to have a good documentary, you need a story. And I think one of the hardest things is how do you pace out that story? How do you tell that story properly? And now, obviously, in a documentary, we're usually behind the camera, so it's our job to try and figure out how do I tell the story properly. And it's through questions, through some good B-roll, through secondary interviews, and I think that's how you really, really start telling that story.
So how much preparation goes into that? Like, do you do like for example, for me, like the main thing, obviously, in documentaries are the interviews. So do you do like a pre-interview where you have that's basically that same conversation but off camera so that you kind of know what the answers are going to be and you can ask, or mostly prepare your interviewee and get them ready to think about those things so that when they're on camera it comes out sort of more natural, or do you prefer to not knowing so that it just sort of comes out as, but sometimes I don't know, for me personally I like preparing my questions, but I'm still debating if it's a good thing to do like a pre-interview.
So I would do a pre-interview. So say if it's a big story, like a story that everybody knows already that's happened in sports, like say if you're talking about an athlete's a triumphant journey or something like that, then I would definitely have I'm talking about a longer documentary, a film. So I would sit down with the athlete and I'd go through, first of all, tell me about your career, tell me all that stuff. I don't have to give all the questions I'm going to ask them, but at least I can get a feeling. And who else do we have to talk about, or who else can we talk to who helped you on your journey? And I think that's very important because, yes, you have your main hero, I'd say, in the documentary, but you have a lot of supporting cast that you need to help tell that story, especially that you have time to tell that story, so you want to tell it properly. So I think definitely a good pre-production meeting. And honestly, most of the work in documentaries is all done in pre-production. Because then eventually, say if you're talking to a hockey player, well, you're going to have to go to his hometown. You're going to have to shoot his home rink. You're going to have to talk to his old coaches. You're going to have to talk to, I don't know, friends, neighbors, etc. You might not use them all, but you want to try and tell how that journey went.
So would you, once you've done that, like, is it something that you build up in the edit, or do you already have like an idea of how the story is going to go?
I think ideally you want to have an idea how the story is going to go. Now, you're going to ask questions, and someone's going to say some stuff that you didn't expect that you'll have to adjust how you want it to go later on. There might be a couple hiccups or curveballs that you didn't know about, but I definitely think planning out the pacing for a longer documentary is definitely beneficial. You need to know where it starts and where it ends. The middle could change, but you need the ending and the starting. At least that's how I feel. And that's how most of them are done. Like, I don't know, if you watch 30 for 30, or even like we were just talking before we came on about The Last Dance, when you're tuning into these, okay, how this ends. 95% of the time, if you're a sports fan. If you're not a sports fan, then you're going in blind. Yeah, you might not know. But when you know how it ends, it's in the middle that you have to get right, because that's the interesting part. You don't know how that athlete got to that final journey.
Yeah, no, that's true. So speaking of all those documentary series, like what's your favorite one? What's the most the biggest inspiration?
I really think that the ESPN 30 for 30s is really what got me into watching sports documentaries, because I found they do them so well. One of my favorite ones is I Hate Christian Leitner, because I remember I was growing up playing basketball at the time and watching Duke and watching Christian Leitner. And Christian Leitner was just like in NCAA, he was at the time the greatest NCAA basketball player, you know? So then
He
later
was on the
on,
dream team.
yeah, he was on the dream team too. Yeah. The only college athlete to be on the dream team. But like, 10 years after all that happened, and seeing ESPN come out with the 30 for 30 on that, actually could have been maybe more than 10 years, but it was interesting to relive that and see kind of what he went through, and see his perspective after his NBA career. So that's what really got me into ESPN 30 for 30. I watched a bunch of them. There's some like Bo Knows, the Bo Jackson one is really, really good. The Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa one is another one that I really like, because I really liked Mark McGuire. And yeah, I think they really set the tone for how sports documentaries should be.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, I agree. Same. That's actually that's what inspired me to start Beyond the Game, because originally my goal was to make short form documentaries, because I was watching a lot of 30 for 30 and I felt like I loved it. I watched them all, and but it was like a TV format, so I was like, oh, I could do something similar, but like 5 to 10 minute videos, and back then YouTube wasn't as big, like vlogging hadn't started yet, like it wasn't a thing, so it was more like blogs and stuff. So I wanted to start this website where there'd be videos and people would go and watch basically what the Players Tribune became, but that was more articles where I wanted to do videos. But anyway, that changed a lot, and here we are, and focused on sports videography. But I did do a lot of short documentaries for a few years actually. But yeah, 30 for 30 was a big inspiration. I remember watching a lot of those 24/7 as well, the boxing and the hockey version. Like a hockey would do it, NHL would do it once a year for the, what's it called, the outdoors
Winter Classic.
Yeah, Winter Classic.
Winter Classic.
Yeah, so they would follow the teams, in the week before, I think, and just sort of the lead up to the event and then the whole thing. And boxing, I remember watching a 24/7 with Money Mayweather, and he was fighting. I can't remember the name of the other guy.
Pacquiao.
No, it was way before that. It was like,
Oh, way before Pacquiao?
Yeah, the guy that he sucker punched when he was.
Okay.
What was his name? I don't know. It was a Mexican guy. Can't remember his name. Anyway, but yeah, I loved it. I think the first scene was just like him talking straight to camera, like Mayweather saying like, "Name me one other athlete that's never lost," and then it's and that never, and it's just like him just bragging for 5 minutes straight to camera, like super close up. This is awesome, because you never really see that usually in sports interviews. Like it would just be scrums, and players would be kind of humble most of the time. But yeah, it was fascinating to see. It was like one of the first eras of like seeing behind the curtain and see how people are in real life. And like in the case of 24/7, you'd see Floyd get into it with his dad, and you'd see things that you would never see usually on camera. And the 30 for 30 thing was awesome as well, because you would get all the backstories. I think the first one that I watched was the Vlad Divac and can't remember the name of the other guy, but like One's Brothers, I think it was called.
Oh, yes, because the country split.
Yeah, exactly. So that was fascinating. And then, yeah, there's a ton of other stories. I remember like the Marcus Dupree story, like the best that never was. And yeah, a bunch of others. Yeah, to me, they were great. Also, like recently on Netflix, there's that Untold series that I find is very, very similar and very cool in a way, because it's all these stories that you kind of heard of, but well, some were more popular than others. Like obviously, when you go to the like the Gators and stuff, like it's that's more well known. But there's also like the what was it called, like the ref that was betting on sports and all these things, and those are really well done.
So the one I like is Crime and Penalties. It's about the Danbury Thrashers, and the reason why is because we know I know one of the guys who played on that team, and basically it was during the NHL strike, they became like the most popular hockey in New Jersey, but it was owned by the mob. So it was kind of interesting. Like I heard about it, but I never paid much attention to it, and I definitely didn't hear about it back then. I only heard about it later on in life. So to see that took place in like what 2004, it was pretty interesting because I was working for the NHL at the time, but yeah, I was on strike, so we weren't working. And then you find out that there was a team, NHL, a hockey team owned by the mob that was like basically sold out, having fights on the ice all the time, paying players in cash. Like it was really interesting documentary to see. So it opens your eyes to things that you didn't know about. And I remember even further back when I was a kid, one documentary that would come out every year, and I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember when a team would win the championship, and right after they won the championship, they would advertise selling DVDs and VHSs of their championship run? So I used to always love watching those when it was over because you got to see like relive the playoffs, but you got to see all that exclusive locker room stuff and the practices and that, because back then there wasn't all this access, not there like there is now. So I was, interested in editing and in sports, obviously. So for me, I always look forward to checking out those videos to see like, okay, let's see who's on the team or how these guys are reacting or what they're going through on a day to day. So I used to always look forward to those championship DVDs. I don't think they do them anymore because now you could probably just go on the team site and they post it on YouTube anyway, all the clips and everything. But that's what I used to look forward to. One of my early documentary days.
Yeah. Well, I think like to your point earlier about coming up with the middle of the story. I think like what makes to me a good documentary is finding out something new, not necessarily something new, but like coming up with something that, especially like so we're talking sports documentaries, like we're so used to seeing the typical product of game product, but not just the game, but also the coverage and the post game interviews, all the, like the TNT, all the anchor shows and all that sort of stuff. So to see beyond that, to be able to still be surprised by like whether it's a conversation that I remember one of the the USA basketball one with the year that Kobe was playing with LeBron and D Wade and all that, and it starts with a conversation where Kobe says, first game against Spain, I'm running through Paul Gasol, and like all these things that like you would never think would actually be discussed beforehand, and then it's fascinating to be there and see it, and same thing with the ref, like the untold story about the ref that was betting on basketball. Like you're so used to being told that refs are sort of basically have no soul and they just do the things by the book, and that's who they are, that's what they do. And then you get this guy having like saying on camera like, yeah, we used to do this thing where we'd make this bet between all the refs in a game where the first one who calls a foul has to pay for dinner after the game. So like the first 5-10 minutes there'd be no fouls and the players would be like, what's going on, and everybody would get upset. It's like these are the things that, like, even as a sports fan who've been watching sports for years, for decades, it still like surprises you, and it's like, oh, that's something I kind of knew but I didn't know. And it's like so you to have these moments, that's to me what makes like a great story. It makes it interesting and makes you follow along, even though you already know sort of the broad lines of the story itself.
Exactly.
But yeah,
that Redeem Team documentary we were talking
yeah.
about. So just that Kobe clip where he says he's going to run through Paul Gasol, right? They used that on the trailer. That was the trailer. Yeah. And that got everybody hyped on that.
Special sound effect on when he runs through it.
Exactly. But everybody got so hyped just because of that one moment. And honestly, in the documentary, that's such a small moment. Yeah, it wasn't even like anything big, but the way that they advertised it with that trailer, like I was excited to see that just for that clip. I was like, oh my God. Like just the preparation and like you said, all the players are talking about, he's like, I'm going to run through my team. I'm going to show you guys that I'm part of your team. I'm going to run through my brother at the time. And, it was a 30-second clip that helped sell that documentary. And honestly, in the documentary, that was just a part of the storyline, part of the middle of the story. But it's interesting how you could really highlight key moments for teasers from these documentaries.
No.
Obviously, there's the Holy Grail one that came out that everyone, well, most sports guys love is the Bulls dynasty one, The Last Dance.
Yeah.
Now, what did you think of The Last Dance when it came out? Because it came out honestly during COVID. It was perfect.
They released it early for that reason. Because I think it was supposed to come out like, because I think COVID started in March. It was supposed to come out in July or something, and then they released it like late April, just because everybody's at home with nothing to do. Let's make the most of it. And everybody knew it was coming by then. I think they had released like a trailer or two, so people were psyched about it, and they're like, "Oh fuck it, let's do it." Even though I think they hadn't finished editing like the last episode or two, but yeah, no, it was great. It was great. It was just funny. I think like everyone who were already watching sports documentaries loved it, but saw it for what it was. Where because it was COVID, there's tons of people, and because it was Michael Jordan as well, tons of people who don't watch sport documentaries watched it, and it was their first exposure to sport documentaries, and they're like, "Oh, this is insane!" This is because they basically had the same reaction that I had the first time I watched a 30 for 30. So, but because it's Michael Jordan, because it's everybody's watching it, it's like the biggest like Squid Games when it came out. It's like it's the thing of the moment. So it just became a bit bigger than what it really was. Let's be honest. But it was good. It was well done. There was like a lot of back and forth in time. I think I'm just curious I wonder if you weren't there in the 90s, would you be as psyched about it as I was? I don't know.
Yeah, because we lived it. We knew what was happening.
Yeah, because it was a lot of nostalgia. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure if you're not really nostalgic about that period, like, was it as amazing for you as it was for me?
I found it was really well produced the way the stories went, because the timeline moved. So like obviously in every episode you were in the final year, that last dance year, but like every episode it would go to like an earlier championship and then go back and forth in time. But they did it smart. Like they showed you a timeline, so you knew like, okay, we're going back in time now. We're in 1998. We're going back to 1991. And one of my the first episode, I still remember this moment, and you'll probably be like, oh yes, I remember this too. I'm watching it, and we had a coworker, and he's in the movie, and he's telling people no for autographs from Michael Jordan. Now we had heard that our old coworker used to work for the NBA and was doing this European tour with them, and I never thought anything of it. But when I saw him in the first 20 minutes of The Last Dance, I was like, oh my God, are you serious? He's there? Like he made the footage, he made the cut. So it was really impressive to see that. That was probably one of my favorite moments.
Probably his as well. He would have been psyched.
But what did you feel when you saw Ray on that?
Oh, I laughed. I think I texted Paul. That was hilarious. I was like, "Holy shit!" But yeah, no, it's funny because especially that it just started and these like in the first like 5 minutes or something. I was like, "Oh, here we go."
Exactly. But I automatically felt like a part of it. I was like, I know that. Yeah, there he is. So it really kept me more intrigued, And I was a big Charles Barkley fan when I was younger. So when the Suns lost and I watched that episode, I felt all that pain all over again. Because at the time, they had the best record in the NBA. Barkley was the MVP. So to see all that again and to see like different perspectives of it, I found that really, really interesting.
I was a big Barkley mostly during the Suns years, like a little bit in Philly as well, but and the Pacers as well before that.
You're a Reggie Miller fan, eh? Because he used to give Spike Lee shit all the time.
I was an underdog fan. I liked the guys that were like good, but never quite good enough to beat the Bulls. Basically, those were my guys, except for the Jazz. No one cares about the Jazz.
No, exactly. What I really liked too about The Last Dance is their camera angles too when they're interviewing Jordan. They had the standard rule of thirds one, stuff like that. But like it became iconic with the iPad and all the memes after. Obviously because of the time we live in, but they did a really, really good job with their interviews. and their lighting and everything. So that's what I thought was really, really interesting. And I really liked, and something that a lot of documentaries don't always do good at is hero shots. Like they have those nice hero shots of Michael Jordan where he's sitting there smoking a cigar overlooking the water. And some documentaries do them, but I feel like they're rushed a bit, where this, I mean, they had so many nice ones of him reflecting, looking back, that I thought they did a really, really good job. And that's what I enjoyed about that on a technical aspect.
So no, it's funny because for me, I had that same feeling when I was watching the 24/7 series because I felt like it was really different in a way because there was two, most of the interviews, there was two shots. There was one where every time a player or a fighter would say something like super deep or important or intense, it would be like a super close up of their face looking straight down the barrel of the camera.
With the ring lights, you can see the ring light in their
Yeah,
eyes.
and the other shot would be well, I was gonna say typical, but like you said, it'd be like on the 1/3, but the interesting part would be that wider shot. Usually, if you're on the right of the screen, you're sort of looking to the left of the camera. You're sort of looking across, where they would do it the other way. Where if you're on the right, they were sort of towards, and it was weird, but it worked. It was kind of different. It kind of
Okay.
felt like they were alone in the room a bit. I don't know if they did it all the time, but I remember that they did it a few times. And but I liked even if you don't even bother with the whole not going across the camera with the wide shot. I just like the idea of the wide shot. They were talking. It was like a typical documentary thing where they're not talking to camera; they're talking to someone else. But every time they were saying something important, they would cut to a extreme close up that was direct to camera, and that felt like they're talking to you, and it's always a moment or something that's of value, so you're sort of drawn in every time. And I did copy that and used it in many documentaries that I did after that, like every time. And I would have to argue sometimes because when I say documentaries, well, like, it would be either documentaries or sometimes working with teams where they do like a reality TV type
A longer feature kind
show.
of thing.
Yeah, and I would always try to do that, like have a wide shot and have a close up, but the close up be straight to camera. But when players, or sometimes it was just like random lower level guys that were interviewed because it's a community thing or whatever, and they're not used to be on camera, and the PR or the person from the team that was there was like, oh, you can just talk to me, and I always have to insist, like, do you mind talking to camera, because it just feels better, looks better, it's gonna I'm going for something here. So like, but it's easier, like people tend to go for the easy while they're filming, and because what happens is that if the person's not used to being on camera, first of all, they forget to look at the camera the whole time, and also sometimes they can feel a bit awkward if there's two other people in the room talking to a machine instead of talking to one of those two people. But if they can do it, it usually, like, yeah, it comes out pretty good, because especially if it's something of emotional or intense, and you can deliver it straight to camera. I always feel it's funny because originally, like, typically when I was in television and stuff, like, talking to camera was for typical TV shows, like with a hand mic, and
The
your
news. The
journalist or
news.
your anchor, yeah, so something like that. And as soon as you're doing something a bit more dramatic, you're always looking off camera. So it's sort of changing all that and doing something different, and I quite liked it. So I've copied it many times after that.
It's hard, right? Because you're doing interviews for a documentary, and you have all these testimonials basically, or all these interviews, and you have to come up with guidelines right away. Like, okay, like you said, you have people looking straight at the camera for certain moments. You have to decide how we're going to make this look, and you don't want every interview looking the same way. You want some difference. So you got to know who's on the left side, who's on the right side. And I always try. So I have my camera set up. I always just step one step over from my camera, and I have the person talk to me. But I'm only one step, because there are moments where I catch them do looking at the camera, and I'll use it. I don't mind. but I try to keep their focus on me. Now, for your second shot, are you do you like it when the second shot is just on the interviewer from like a say a 45-degree angle, or do you like it when it shows back even further and you can see the person interviewing, you see the lights, kind of see a little bit of that BTS footage? What's your preference?
It depends on the context, I guess. It depends on the type of documentary you're doing. Like I personally rarely did something where there'd be an angle where the behind the scenes is in the shot. I'm nothing against it, but usually if I'm working with a sports team where we're trying to stay within that, and I'm not part of it, and but um, but I do like it sometimes. Like I know, like even like 60 Minutes and stuff like that. Sometimes they have like a shot that's like has the interviewer and the interviewee, and you can see the lights and you can see everything. And in a way, it's their way to make it to show you the context of the interview, like how like it's one on one, and we're in this little hotel, business room, and it's very serious and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I have nothing against it, but personally, I've never done it.
I like the kind of, so like on these uh, untold stories or even the Last Dance. I like when they introduce people when they're walking into the room and they're kind of like just chit chatting and they're miking them up and then they do the clapboard and then all of a sudden, boom, they're in the interview. I
Yeah,
really, really
that's
like
very
that technique.
Netflix.
Yeah. Because honestly, in most sports documentaries, like, or like if you're doing a short form video, you don't have time to add all those extra things in, or because you're constrained, like, So I do like that, and I see it more and more now. Now it's becoming like the trend, right? What's your thoughts on that? Like, have you done that before? Have you used that technique before?
Well, I do try to start recording as early as possible to maybe catch something that might be interesting. But yeah, Netflix does that in a lot of their documentaries, and I don't know if it's a way to humanize the interviewee. It's a way to make them look normal and show that they're everyday people. And I always start by something a little bit embarrassing, like the interviewer will say something about, oh, I don't know, don't catch me on this side, or don't let me say this type of thing, and blah blah, and they look vulnerable straight from the bat. But yeah, I do like it. It's a good thing. But I tend to, for me, it's more about um, like the order of my questions, and to well, first of all, even before you start recording, like make sure you have a conversation with the person so that you sort of break the ice, and you've already talked a bit, and they're comfortable with you before the cameras actually start rolling. Because otherwise, if you've never met, if it's an athlete that shows up and then the first word you say to them is when the camera's rolling, it's probably going to take 2 to 3 questions for them to actually feel comfortable and give you like real good answers. So you want to start that conversation early, and while you're having a conversation, might as well record, and who knows what's going to come out, because sometimes the best stuff comes out then, and then they give you like the short, brief answer once the camera's rolling. So always good to shoot early, but yeah, it's mainly about the order as well of the questions. Like the first couple questions, I try to basically they're questions that I won't mind if the answer is not that good and I can't use it. Like I won't put my best questions, my most important questions at the start. Like I'll be like basically sort of softball, easy questions just to get things rolling, get them comfortable, and then slowly like we'll get into the more important stuff. And then I'll ask a couple questions that are a bit more that I know I want like a particular, well, not a particular answer, but like, for example, one question that I always ask when I interview an athlete, when I used to do my little documentaries, I would always finish by asking, what do you think is the biggest misconception about you? I actually learned that from Barbara Walters.
Okay.
But
I didn't know you were a big fan. I didn't know you're a big BW fan.
yeah, well, she's a interview
An
queen.
icon.
So and yeah, and that was and that's how I saw her in an interview saying that, and she explained it how like that's always when people open up the most, and it's true because it's especially someone that's a public figure, you give them the opportunity to let people know what the biggest misconception is about them. They usually open up on something. They usually go further and deeper than with any other question because that's something that they've probably been carrying for a while. They don't get to talk about much. And if you give them the opportunity, first of all, they'll think about it. They won't just give you like a cookie cutter type of answer. They'll be like, oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think you know what, and they know they're just thinking, should I say it? And then they'll say it, and then yeah, they're like that's always for me anyway. I feel that's always a good question, and it's usually something that will open the interview in the documentary itself because with that answer, they straight away they look human, they look vulnerable, they look ready to talk, and that gives like a good start, a good vibe for the documentary or for the interview or for that feature piece, whatever it is.
Well, that's the hard part, right? Is some people give some robotic answers sometimes, and you're looking for the parts that are authentic and are real. So that part of it is if they're talking to you and not the camera, they're going to be way more authentic. Now, like you, I try and press record as soon as possible. But the reason is not because I'm trying to capture all that behind the scenes footage, is I am so afraid that I'm going to forget to press record. Because that
That's a
is
good point.
every videographer or filmmaker's greatest fear is not having that record button on. So I rather have it rolling for 5 minutes or 10 minutes that I don't use, but I know I've pressed record already. I see that red light. I feel comfortable. Um, but I'm not a filmmaker. So if I'm doing documentary stuff, sometimes I'm hired by companies or teams to do this. So we don't always have control over the questions. But I do always try to slide in one or two at the end to try and get them more comfortable. Like, and it does help. Like honestly, that Barbara Walters tip you gave, that's a pretty good one. I'm gonna steal that. But also, it's people don't realize too. At the end of these questionnaires, sometimes you need them to do taglines. And that's always I find tricky because the person has just kind of let their guard down and you have this great conversation and you're like, oh, that, and they're like, oh, was that good? And you're like, yeah, everything was great. And you're like, oh, by the way, I need you to say a couple lines. Because when you're filming these things, you can get them to segue into different chapters or different parts by giving them certain taglines or having them say certain stuff. And I always find that's where it's really tricky because it's not genuine. You just had them open up and they give you these heartfelt answers. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I need you to say the title of the movie, or I need you to say this. And I never liked that part. So I've tried it in the beginning and it doesn't really, because then their questions kind of takes longer to warm them up. So now I do that stuff at the end and I find it a lot better. Yes, it's a little awkward, but at least I've already gotten all the good material that I need. If I don't use that tagline, if I don't use that segue, I don't care. I just want to make sure that I have their answers. Now, when you're cutting documentaries, do you use a lot of L cuts, J cuts to segue into new chapters?
Yeah, well, especially if I have B-roll, definitely. I'll usually, yeah, I'll do that to sort of segue into usual, if we're coming out of the interview and going to some sort of B-roll or some sort of action segment, it'll obviously connect with what they were saying towards the end. So not necessarily like an Elka or a Jika in a sense of like a few frames or a second, but sometimes just like the last sentence you'll see, like let's say he's talking about going to training. Well, the over that sentence, you'll see a wider shot of the training facilities, and you'll see the athletes sort of walking into the building. So it's just sort of a smooth transition from the interview to that segment of the video. But yeah, definitely. try to play with that, and because you want to cut, and especially if you're doing short form documentary, which is a totally different, obviously experience, but yeah, you definitely want to have a lot of B-roll. You don't necessarily want to stay on the player interview for too long, so you're constantly coming in and out of visual stuff, visual B-roll, and trying to make it as dynamic as possible. So yeah, should we talk about short form documentaries?
Yeah, sure, sure. So I'll just say one more thing on transitions and stuff like
Mm.
that in documentaries. What I like about documentaries is they're usually clean transitions. They're usually straight cuts, J cuts, and it works because you really have the time to tell the story. Now, in short form documentaries or short form features, so when I do some, say for like, I don't know, Hockey Canada or something like that, sometimes I do my interviews and I don't even have any B roll yet. So while I'm doing my interviews or my questions, and you know, they'll supply some questions, I'll throw some in. They kind of know what story they want. They do a lot of these homegrown stories like where's the player from, how's he advanced in his career, he's excited for the next Olympics or he's excited for the next world championships, etc. So you go and you meet the player and his family and you've done all this stuff and now you're in his hometown. So now it's like, okay, I got to go to this rink. I got to go to that rink. I got to go to this Tim Hortons. I got to get a aerial shot of his town. I want to get his home school. Then you got to go to a practice later on and try and catch him practicing and getting practice clips and all these things. So there's different ways to build it. So if you're doing a story that's in the past, well, you got to go through archives and look for footage and photos and stuff like that. If you're doing something that's more present, you can still use those photos and that when he's talking about his childhood, but you got to run out and try and capture all this B-roll. Now, I do find it a bit easier while I like planning it out while I'm doing the interview because it's a fast turnaround. Like I'm doing the interviews, say on a Monday, the video's out on the Friday, so it's a hectic week. But your brain is going, and I find that's the tricky part that people don't always see is like, okay, how am I going to build this story? What am I going to show that makes this story interesting?
No, I agree, and I think I like the idea of like building a shot list after the interview because that way you know exactly what you need, and because sometimes it's kind of the opposite. Well, sometimes you don't have, especially if you're doing like a feature piece on the player, and let's say you work as a videographer for a team, you're probably just going to rely on what you already have, which is training footage and game footage, and but yeah, it's good to like I remember doing a few feature pieces with the Canadians actually where we would ask players to give us footage of them as kids, and you know the parents would send them some stuff of you know VHS recordings of them playing at 9, 12 years old, and we'd use that. So sometimes it's actually easier than you think because I'm thinking of people watching this or listening to this and thinking like how can I apply that to my local club that I'm filming, and then there's always first of all photos somewhere, and like you said, if there isn't any archives and you're trying to do a documentary about your team, then it's a question of filming the facilities, filming the locker rooms, and filming the players. Just like you said, you mentioned earlier about Michael Jordan, like it can be just like hero shots of them throwing the football or getting dressed or just dribbling with headsets on or just little moments like that that you can use pretty much anywhere, and also just the surroundings like for example in the documentary where someone's talking about their old high school days, maybe you don't have footage of them playing in high school, but you can go to the high school itself and just film the football field and then film the flags and the this and the that, or maybe there is a football game and you film it from afar, sort of slightly out of focus sort of thing, or you know there's tons of ways to create B-roll for a story once you know what the story is about, obviously. But
Two
yeah.
unsung heroes I find in sports documentaries are photos. Photos play such a huge role in documentaries, and people don't realize that because you're like thinking, I'm a videographer, I gotta shoot this, I gotta shoot that. But any photos you can have, old, new, there's a way you can use them in your story for sure. And the second thing that I find you always see in documentaries, and they're more powerful than you think, is an empty arena, an empty stadium. And you go there and you film as many angles as you can of this stadium, either a drone shot from the far corner, lights off, lights on. And I guarantee you there will be a spot where you can use that in your documentary, because there's going to be a play where the athlete's going to be talking about something that you don't have. And that's the perfect spot to throw that in, because right away the audience relates to that's where that moment happened.
Yeah, no, that's true. I agree. So let's talk short form. What's the difference basically when you know that you're only gonna be doing like a 3 minute, 4 maybe 5 minute like feature piece on someone? Does it affect your interview? Does it affect your storytelling? Because obviously you got less time to tell that story, so that middle part becomes very tricky as opposed to like I don't know, a 20, 30, 45-minute documentary. So how do you approach that?
So obviously you approach it with less questions. And I think maybe like, say you have max 7, 8 questions. Okay. Now the tricky part is cutting up those questions. Now you don't have to give the full answer. You got to give the best parts of that answer to get your story through. And I find that's the tricky part. Now, what I try to do is I have my main character, so he gets the most say in the video. And then what I do is anybody else that I've interviewed, they're the backup actors or backup people that I have them just say stuff that supports what he's saying or will bring it to the next section. And that's what's challenging, because 3 minutes of interviews goes fast. And you don't really have those dead spaces. Like in a longer documentary, you can have that dead space where you have like you really show the scenic shot with music and really flow into it. Where in a short form, you have someone talking pretty much the whole time. Now it's different people, or you have a play, maybe put the sound from that play in there, but you got to find a creative way to tell that story. So the first thing that I do is I cut up all my talking heads and I lay them out on my timeline, and I try and figure out how is the story going. Then I start putting in my B-roll and start adding in all my stuff. See what photos I can use. Then graphics, subtitles, whatever else you need. But really nail down that key story and figure out, okay, what is it? I have an idea of what the story is, obviously, because it's small, so it's usually about a journey or something like that. But you want to make sure like your main timeline is already edited to all those talking heads and the key moments, and then it's to puzzle it together. What's going to make the cut, what's not going
to. Yeah, no, I agree. But like I'll say as well, like first of all, because it's much shorter. Because earlier you were talking about, yes, there's the main storyline, but there might be there's obviously, first of all, other people that you'll interview and they'll bring something to the table as well, and there might be smaller stories within the story and all that sort of thing. With a shorter piece, you can't really do that because you don't have time, and I would say even more further than that, like you want to keep your story as simple as possible. Like there's one sort of thing that you're focusing on, and pretty much the whole feature is about that thing, and it's building that thing kind of slowly because it's still like a 3 to 5 minute video. So you're building up that thing, but it's just that one thing. Because if you're trying to spread it around, it just goes in all sorts of directions, and it gets confusing, and you don't have time to sort of let the information sort of be absorbed by the viewers. And the second thing as well is that a lot of times when it's a shorter piece, there's so much you want to say that, the interviewee or the other sort of, the coaches, the fans, the parents, everybody who's talking, they're pretty much talking the whole time. Like I think it's a mistake that, like, yes, like you said, you don't have time to just have like music for 30, 40 seconds with just visuals, but you don't want people just like, and there's never a pause, because we need that pause to sort of absorb what's been said and then move on to the next thing. So for me, like you said, I place my A roll first. I sort of place the interview throughout my timeline. And once I'm happy with the flow of the information, what's being said, I'm not looking at what it looks like I'm just listening. Once I'm happy with that, then I build the visual. And with my interview, I like to cut, and a friend of mine in Australia actually taught me how to do that, where Julian is his name, if he's ever listening. But it was the like an interview, like let's say I'm here and I'm saying, hi, my name is E. I'm a sports videographer, and today I'm doing a podcast. You would cut it in a way that instead of just saying it like that, because that's how it was recorded, you would sort of split it. So it'd be like, hey, my name is E. I'm a sports videographer, and today I'm doing a podcast. Like there's pauses that like adds a bit of drama, and it sounds silly the way I'm saying it, but like how obviously while I'm saying these things, there's like slow-mo B-roll on top of it, and there's a slow sort of dramatic music that goes with that pace, and it just makes that information a lot more dramatic, a lot easier to consume and understand. And yeah, it has that documentary vibe. And by doing it like that the whole way through, then it's okay if someone's talking the whole time, because they're not like because usually that's what people do. They just put the interview there, and no matter how it was recorded, that's how it's going to end up. They don't actually chop it up and move things around. I often start, there's the beginning of one answer and it finishes with another answer, and I sort of mash the two together to make the answer that I want, but not that I'm changing their words or anything, but it just makes more sense. And it's more to the point than actually having three questions back to back. I just sort of take the best parts of each and just put it together. And with that technique of a bit of pause in between for dramatic effect and for just like letting the story flow. And yeah, that's my personal technique.
You never notice those cuts because you're hiding it with B-roll also.
Yeah.
So it seems seamless. Like, yeah, I do that all the time. The thing is, so like short form content like that, it all depends on your turnaround time. And that's what's tricky, because it depends on your interviews. Like, so the last time I did one was for World Juniors. I was lucky. The team sent the player interview, so I didn't have to go to the player, and they sent player B-roll. But then I had to go film the dad, the mom, the grandfather, the coach. Now I filmed all that in one day, because thank God I got them to meet, so I had two together and two together. And the tricky part is changing the backgrounds. Sometimes you're limited to where you can do these interviews. You're always looking for an interesting background. You're always looking for something interesting, but you don't always have those options. So I did two different angles always. And after I did those interviews one day, the next day was, okay, let's go to two towns, which were an hour and 20 minutes apart, and get my shot list. Okay, let's go through all my exterior shot lists that I need, arenas, housing, library, a school, all that stuff. And then you put it together, so it depends on what your turnaround is. But the more editing and documentary styles you do, the more preparation you need to do. And the more preparation you do, the easier project will be. Because that's what it all comes down to, is pre-production. If you know what you're going to shoot that day, it makes your edit a lot easier. I find the longest part is editing the talking heads. Like you said, like finding sentences that can go together and get the answers we're looking for, or get them to express themselves the way that you think they should. That's the longest part. Editing, putting the B-roll on top, for me, that's always a finishing piece. That's easy, at least the way I go about it. But chopping up the interviews, I find always the most challenging.
So what would you recommend, like a younger, let's say I'm a sports videographer at a local high school team or a sports club, whatever, but I don't know how to pick. I want to do a short documentary or something like that, but like, how do I find the proper subject? How do I find my ideas? How do I get started? Like, what would you recommend for that?
Yeah, it's tricky. You want like someone who's had a tough journey, or something, somebody that's overcome something. So maybe if you're following a high school team, you know, you don't always have to go for the team captain or the best player. Maybe one of the interesting stories is somebody who got cut the year before and made it this year, or a coach who's coached many teams and what is special about this team. These are stories that you can easily do. But I'm sure if you reached out to your local high school or local sports team, they'd be excited if someone was willing to do a little documentary on them, or a short form documentary for them, because it gives you some free publicity. But for the videographer, it gives you practice, because you know what, just setting up the interview, doing the sound, lighting, all these things, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And we've been doing this a long time. No matter what room we walk into, it has different challenges. It's going to have different lighting. Obviously, like, if you can control the lighting as much as you can, turn off the house lights, bring your own lights. That way you get to control your image. If for some reason you can't, then it's trickier. You got to figure out ways to use that light to your advantage, that extra light, whether it's a window that you want lit up on one side and you're going to put your key light on the other side. There's definitely ways to work around it, but the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, and the more comfortable you're going to get at it. I mean, we've done hundreds and hundreds of these interviews, and every time I go in, I'm always like, okay, what's the challenge today? How am I going to do this? What's the angle? Like, you always go through the same checklist over and over again.
And I would say as well, like, I think, like, again, keep it simple. And it's this time, what I mean by that is, instead, because the typical move for someone is to, okay, I'm going to do a documentary on my local volleyball team, and then it's about whether they're going to win the season or the tournament, and it becomes this whole production of, I have to film every game, and they have to do well, otherwise my story is dead, and also everybody has to be there and involved. Whereas they, like, don't focus on results, and don't focus on the entire team. Like, try to find the one person, like you said, maybe it's the coach, or maybe it's a player doesn't have to be the best player on the team. Maybe it's just their backstory that's interesting, how they drive like an hour and a half to go to each practice, and why are they motivated that much. And so that, because it's a lot easier if you're relying on just one person, than as opposed to the entire team, especially if that person's on board, obviously. but also, if you're relying on that person's backstory or on their personality or what they do around sports, that's a much easier story to tell than if you're relying entirely on their results on the court, because you're probably not going to be filming every game. So you don't want to, if you only have access to a couple of games or 3 games, whatever, and they just end up not performing at those games, or they're injured, or so many things can happen. So, and also, that story's been told a million times. So if you can tell another story that's a bit more personal, that's a bit different, that hasn't been told yet, that's always, it's, first of all, it's easier, and second of all, most of the time it's actually better. So that would be my recommendation.
And the thing is, too, a little tip is, you don't have to stretch that story out. Tell the story, and when it's complete, end it. You don't have to keep, like, with the long, even a long drone shot, or some long music and these big pauses in between. Find the right pacing for your story, but when it's over, end it. Don't drag it out. Now, for a format like this, obviously, to share it, the ideal place is YouTube, because it's long format.
Yeah. Well, TikTok has longer and longer videos these days, but I still think that, YouTube's probably the best.
A vertical documentary, I don't want to even hear about
that. But now,
that.
like, on TikTok, there's like, sometimes you can press the button and it goes like full screen.
Oh, really?
Not too sure how it works. Yeah. I don't know if it has to be the video has to be a certain length because you'll see, like, sometimes there's like press for full screen, and then it goes full screens and it turns 16:9. But I don't know if it's something that you need to preset, or your video needs to qualify by having, a certain length or whatever, but it does exist.
What do you prefer working on? Like a longer video, like a documentary style video, or hype reels and recap videos?
I like both. Like they both serve their own purpose. I think it's more fun for me, for my style. Documentaries I enjoy a bit more because I like telling that story, and I like having just raw information and trying to make sense of it all by putting it in a story somehow. Where pure entertainment is fun, but it's less my jam. Like I don't yeah, I like those. I like telling stories. So entertaining for the sake of entertaining, it looks good, but I'm not. I don't think I'm that great at it, to be honest. Like I'd leave that to the After Effects wizards out there and let them sort of knock it out the park. Where I'll prefer to like spend time building a story. And what's fun about it is when people who were there, who gave you the interviews, who the people that I was filming this entire time, and they're thinking this is gonna be shit. Like my interview was weak, and then the game that he came to film, I didn't score, and they're thinking like this is not gonna. And then they watch and they're like, wow, like they didn't realize like so many shots that they thought would never make it are in it, and it works and it looks good, and that to me is always yeah, it's that's where I find my I'm proud of myself where I make something out of nothing basically. So yeah, that's I enjoyed that a lot more, but I do enjoy hype reels as well. It's different.
The challenge of trying to tell someone's story, because it's hard. It's hard
Yeah,
because you want them to be happy with it at the end, and you know, you have to look at it in a different way. Highlights are fun, but highlights, yeah, sometimes there's not just a story to it. It's like, hey, check out this goal, or check out this basket, or this home run. But telling someone's story and having them proud of it also is really rewarding, especially once you send that final cut over and you're like, hey guys, your video will be released on Friday, say, and here's a sneak peek of it. And when you get that email back and they're extremely happy with how you told their story, it's really, really rewarding. And I enjoy that the most, honestly. It is more work. It's a lot more work, just setting up the interviews, cleaning up the audio, finding the right music, editing the photos. And sometimes they give you all these great photos and you can't use them all. So, picking the right footage to go with the story and having that person happy with it at the end, that's what makes it all worthwhile.
yeah. On that note, we unfortunately don't have a Q&A for the end of this episode, but if someone wants to make a documentary about us, leave it in the comments. We're
There
more
you
than
go.
happy to be subjects of a sports videography documentary. But I have to take place in Montreal though, so that limits the.
I don't know how the arc of that story goes, Is it a romantic comedy, how we met, or what, how does this work? What kind of story is this? See?
Yes, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that angle, but yeah, it could be. Who knows? That story
Who
isn't.
knows?
It's
All
not
right.
over
Well,
yet. We don't know how it ends.
before we sign off, then, if you can only watch one sports documentary, what would it be?
Oh. It's a tough question. It would definitely be a 30 for a 30. Which one was my best one? I think that like the best that never was one of my favorite ones. Um, what else? What was the name of the Herschel Walker? I really like the
Herschel
story.
Walker.
Did you see that one?
Okay. No, I never saw that one.
Yeah, no, it was a good one. I liked it. And he started like basically getting bullied and being like this super skinny kid, and I think he had a lisp or something, and then one summer, just like he was doing like 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 sit-ups every day, and then played football the next year and never looked back, sort of thing. And yeah, no, it was a very interesting story. Yeah, that was a good one. I don't know, there's so many. It's been a while too, but yeah. What about you?
So when I was a kid, I had this VHS, Sir Charles, and it followed Charles Barkley from like high school till after he lost in the finals, and it kind of ended with like, I'm going to get my championship. Now, unfortunately, that never happened, but I watched that documentary many, many times, and I watched it because I was into basketball at the time, and I liked it because it also I was watching the highlights because there was no YouTube back then. So you'd watch the basketball highlights, and I'd watch the basketball highlights for angles. Like, okay, look at it was mostly broadcast angles, but every now and then they had like a behind the scenes camera that gave you a different angle. So I found that really interesting, and I watched that video over and over again. But what I am looking forward to when it does come out is the Netflix Expos documentary.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So that's going to be interesting because I was a part of that, for the last 3 seasons. So that's something that I would definitely looking forward to. But that's only going to come out in like a year and a half, 2 years. So we got some time. So we'll be on episode 150 by the time that comes out. All right. So guys, stay tuned,
Hopefully,
and we'll definitely review that in episode 150 of Game Day Glare.
yes.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
That was fun.
All right. Till next
Yes.
time. See you again.